welcome two incredible gentlemen to the stage. The first, a proud Canadian, humanitarian, and lover of man and beast, Richard Carleton, and the CEO of Aurora Cannabis, the one and only Miguel Martin. Let's hear it for him.
Well, thank you very much for that exuberant introduction. I'm proud and pleased to be joined by Miguel Martin, the CEO of Aurora Cannabis today. I'm going to set the scene for what Aurora has been through in its journey as a company. You know, we talk about the cannabis industry aging in dog years. Well, Aurora was the second Canadian LP to list on the Canadian Securities Exchange back in the spring of 2014, which by my reckoning makes them 56 in human years. And they've seen it all. They've raised a lot of money from public and private investors. They went to the Toronto Stock Exchange, they joined Canada's national benchmark indices, and then they had their challenges as investments made across a whole range of areas of the cannabis industry. Some played out, some may not have been so successful. So Miguel is here today to talk about where Aurora is in its journey, and more importantly, what we see in the coming year and in the future as you have positioned the company now for growth, profitability, and to continue to grow your share of the business.
Well, Richard, thank you, and thanks for everybody here. I think what's interesting to understand about cannabis companies is, unlike other industries, each industry sort of has their nuances, but in cannabis, each of our companies are different. So the real question, you know, is what is Aurora about, and how is Aurora different than maybe some of our primary competitors? And I think what differentiates us is medical cannabis. And if I leave you with anything today, it's our belief that at least in the short term, the growth globally, particularly from a profit standpoint, is all around medical cannabis. So today, Aurora has a 23% share in the Canadian medical cannabis business. Margins are about 62% versus, say, low 30s in the rec business in Canada. Internationally, we're the largest LP in terms of international medical cannabis. We operate in 12 countries with number one or number two positions in many of those countries. And I know we're all consumed by everything that's happening here in the US, and clearly that's a big part. But I would encourage you to spend time on what's happening in Germany, or Israel, or France, or UK, or even now the Netherlands, which is a $2.5 billion market that's equally the size of Canada. All of those things, from a regulatory standpoint, from a patient standpoint, clearly will have an impact on the US. And so medical cannabis is a key part of where we're going.
So, Miguel, one of the things that I do understand about the medical cannabis market is that you have to educate the gatekeepers, the medical professionals who, in fact, are prescribing cannabis in different formulations to patients for different medical issues. So how do you build share in that marketplace? How do you engage in the education of those healthcare professionals to convince them that prescribing cannabis as opposed to some other modalities is the right approach for their patients?
Well, it's a great question, and you know, each country has their own pathways. But what you do learn is that if you're good navigating the regulatory environment of making high-quality medications, labeling, packaging, and working with regulators, that's the first step. And so if you look at a big market like Germany right now, where only 0.1% of the adult population is in that medical system compared to, say, 0.7 or 0.8 in Canada, you know, we're in the early days of it. But to your point about education, what we're really excited about is around the world you're seeing a real growth in clinical research around the efficacy, and those clinicians and physicians that are looking for that type of hard science for their patients. The other part about this whole piece is the overall sort of networking that patients do with each other around exactly what's working. And whether it's the veterans that we have such reverence for in Canada or other patients around the world, we see a commonality, whether it's around neuropathy, pain management, PTSD, and we're really excited to be partnering, and we know some of our competitors are partnering with, you know, folks like the U.S. Veteran Affairs Administration, Yale University, or some of the cutting edge research that's now happening in Israel that we're partnering with there. So all of that puts you in a position to be able to give those facts to the clinicians and physicians so that they can be convinced and therefore then support their patients.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. So for the folks in the audience, what should they be looking for in terms of developments from the research side that will give them the indication that, hey, this is on the right track? This is like, who's doing the work? Who's doing the cutting edge work that is going to help the industry reach more patients?
Well, I think it's, the overall regulatory environment. If you look at the U.S., it was very limited in terms of the access to those cannabinoids to do that research. Right now, we see a public RFP with the U.S. Veteran Affairs Administration accessing over 5 million doses to try to move people off opioids into cannabinoids. That's cutting edge. Yale University, University of Ottawa, the IMCA in Israel, and all these other sort of really cutting edge groups working with responsible and large manufacturers to try to get that news out. I think you're just going to see sort of the cusp of it. And when you see that market, like in Germany, like I said, 0.1% versus say 0.7 in Canada, you have a $2.5 billion category, say in the Netherlands. Those are real economics that really can then support the research around it. And whether it's entourage effect or specific cannabinoids or even isolates, those are all critical components to the value sort of structure that you get. And we all know the stickiness of the margins of the medical business is way better than, say, the current business today with the rec business in Canada.
And of course, one of the issues is supplying that market. Right now, obviously, you're working with flower and extracts. Biosynthesis, of course, is on everybody's mind as a potential as we move more and more into pharmaceutical-grade products. Where's Aurora on that? What's your thinking? When? How? What's the outlook?
So we're really excited about biosynthetics. We were able to purchase a company that had what we believe some of the most cutting-edge biosynthetic assets and IP, both in the plant and outside of the plant. We are partnering with others in our industry around the efficacy of that. And like in many industries, you're going to see biosynthetics as a key component around it. Obviously, the very famous Epidiolex drug that we see, which is an isolate-based product in the US, lends itself to the isolation of those molecules having significant economics. The minor cannabinoids, which we don't talk a lot about, whether it's CBG or CBN or CBA, the economics in the extraction of those right now is quite prohibitive. Biosynthetics really opens up significant economics, both domestically and internationally, around those minor cannabinoids.
Now let's bring it back to the big picture. So what does this mean for Aurora Cannabis as a business? I think you're on record with the analysts as saying that you're looking to move into EBITDA positive territory by the end of the year. How are things going?
I think things are going well. I mean, this is the second inning of a 9-inning, game up in Canada, or the first, period of a 3-period hockey game for our Canadian friends. But what we have in Aurora is basically we are adapting to the environment that we live in today. And many companies were looking at a different sort of macro picture. So we announced over $300 million in savings, and we've executed on that. We most recently announced 60, 80 million in additional efficiencies, and our hyper-focus on medical and the margins associated with there clearly put us in a position. So, I'm here to recommit to that EBITDA positive by end of our fiscal for this year, and we're absolutely confident that we're going to be in a good position to not only meet that, but also be able to grow. So in those key markets, UK, France, Poland, Netherlands, Israel, we've made significant investments to be able to get there. And so from a CapEx standpoint, that's all there. So we're really, excited about the future. And I think in the short term, going back to it, medical cannabis really is a place where I think companies can make money, build infrastructure, and at a time in which the U.S. does pass legalization, I think it's going to start with medical, and companies that have done it in those countries will be well positioned to meet those expectations.
How is Aurora going to participate in the U.S. market? You certainly have challenges based on your listing at the moment. And of course, we stand by, to help you again in that case, if that's a conversation we can have. But how do you propose to think about and position yourself for potential growth in the United States?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, a lot of different companies are going to come at it in different ways, and our approach doesn't have to be the only approach. For right or for wrong, I've spent most of my career working with the FDA, and it is my belief that cannabis will be regulated by the FDA. I know that's a bit of a controversial point, but I find it a bit hard to believe that they'll regulate everything from toothpaste to potato chips to alcohol and tobacco, and somehow cannabis won't be there. I also believe that the path of least resistance will be medical first. And some people will say, well, what about states' rights, and what about all these states that are legal from a rec standpoint? We already have a construct in alcohol where you have a federal construct as well as a state construct. So then you get into interstate and those other things. So as I said earlier, we've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in navigating say, over 150 pesticides in Israel, having a 10% potency variance in Germany, all the packaging, EU GMP, CU MCS, all of those certifications to meet those incredibly strict thresholds. And I do believe, and I think there's a long history of the FDA and other regulatory authorities looking towards, say, Health Canada, looking towards IMCA in Israel, looking towards Germany. And so if you can be successful in those markets, I believe you're going to be successful in the US. Now, whether that means we'll have a partnership or work with other companies, we'll see that. And listen, I'm the first person here to hope that the SAFE Act passes and Senator Schumer's bill gets through there. But in the absence of that, it's a big world out there, and doing all the things you can to be successful in Western Europe and real big regulatory authorities puts you in a good position with the FDA. And so that's how we're going to navigate it.
And thinking again about the international opportunities at this point, the challenge for folks in your chair is often, do we do it organically? Do we make acquisitions? Where are you in that decision tree at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think, the history of Aurora is that we did a lot of things by ourselves. For right or for wrong, complete vertical integration. Going forward, we've partnered with a lot of people. We have a tremendous partner in the Netherlands called the Growery on one of the 10 licenses there. We work with some of our competitors selling genetics or buying products from them. And so, while we have over $400 million of cash on the balance sheet and M&A is available to us, I think more and more so you're going to see us partner with others that have excellence in certain areas, and we think that's the best approach. So, when we look at, say, Germany, some cases we're the wholesaler, in some cases we're the broker. When we're in Israel, we are solely the manufacturer, and we have great partners, including some folks that are in here. And in Canada, we do work with some of our competitors. We buy product from them, we sell genetics to them, and we work with them on biosynthetics. And I think that's healthy for the overall ecosystem.
In fact, I think you're still in distribution and retail in Canada, aren't you?
A little bit. I come from a world where a manufacturer is a manufacturer and a wholesaler is a wholesaler and a retailer is a retailer, but clearly the lines have been blurred a little bit.
Okay, very good. And that's just, I was going to say, we've just about hit the end of our question cards. That was really quick. Thinking about, though, the asset valuations that investors are awarding the industry, I think it's fair to say that there isn't a CEO of either an operator or, in fact, the CEO of the exchange that's satisfied that the companies are being properly rewarded for their efforts and progress towards building the companies and so on. What do you see as a catalyst for an awakening of the marketplace to start to reward Aurora and your peers better in terms of the progress that you've made over the last few years?
Well, I mean, I think, listen, we all, as many people know, particularly the Canadian LPs, we trade a bit as a group. And, that's a bit frustrating, I think, for us and probably for others. I think as people come to better understand these businesses and there's better predictability around how the businesses work, which is one of the reasons why I think medical cannabis is such a great business. Margins are steady, patient levels are steady. I mean, as an example, in Canada, in the rec business, the top 3 companies a year ago did 50% of the business. Today, they do 30%. Medical is much steadier. So in terms of the capital markets, I think institutional investment, I think, consistency in companies being profitable, not only from an EBITDA standpoint, but from a free cash flow standpoint, and the progression of regulations, which we are seeing, whether that's Germany or France or in the UK, giving investors the confidence that this business is going to be there. I know all eyes are on the US, but I think there's a big world out there. And so, listen, we're all frustrated with how these things are currently going. It's a long game, and I think if you have a good balance sheet with a strong management team and a very predictable and profitable piece of business, people are going to come to it.
All right. Well, I think we'll give them a minute and 30 seconds back, unless there are any questions from the audience. Or waiting for the guy to come out to the side. Oh, yes, absolutely, sir. The question is, are there any plans for Aurora to get into the beverages business like some of their competitors?
We've looked at it. I think with all due respect that there are some other companies that really have excellence around beverages. I find particularly in the rec business that was not completely, but you don't have to have first mover status. And so I think onset and offset and the rapid onset technology that you're seeing will make a big difference, particularly in beverages. You're seeing it in ingestibles. and we'll get there. So right now, it's not our priority. And if we see that piece of the business grow, we can definitely jump into it. But right now, I would say from a resource allocation standpoint, we're a little more focused on medical and some of the core items like extracts, concentrates, resins, rosins, stuff like that in the rec business, as opposed to beverages that maybe someone else might be better suited for.
One more question quickly. How much R&D are they spending to look into expansion into Africa?
We made a big bet on Latin America in terms of, a lower cost of production area. We do an inordinate amount, and as you might imagine, in Canada, there's an excess of capacity. So some of the typical drivers that would take you to some of those markets, particularly weather and cost of labor, isn't there for us. So I would say never, but right now, Northern Africa, where I know a lot of products coming from, isn't as big a priority for us.
Okay, we're getting the red light. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, and happy 420.
Happy 420 indeed. Richard Carleton, Miguel Martin.